up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 603. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you all ready for the weekend?
Yeah, I guess there's the league weekend this weekend, so I suppose I am.
That kind of matches the level of enthusiasm felt in the community right now, I think, for the event, even though it's actually a pretty big weekend for the pro scene.
It's just so exciting to play this weekend and then find out afterwards if they're going to pay you the prizes they said they were going to, because sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, so.
Yeah, this is not a great time to be a huge fan of high-level competitive play. Even though this is a big weekend coming up, it'll set the stage for the next season. But they kind of took the wind out of the sails with their announcements and with the prize cut on the Worlds and stuff like that. So we'll see how it goes. I'm going to be doing coverage of it. My job is to bring the insight, excitement, and intrigue of these matches to people, and I'm going to do my best to do that just within the context of the matches themselves, right? Like maybe painting the bigger picture is a little more difficult right now, but still there could be some big important matches to play. And I wish you luck, Luis. I hope you do well. I know that you've got a lot riding on that last weekend, and it's been quite a season for you, up and down and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in second place right now, and the top two rivals go to Worlds and MPL. But like you said, the wind has kind of gone out of my sails here, so I'm going to try my best. I've never gone to a tournament without thinking I could do well at the tournament. I think my decks are good. I think that I've got a great shot here, but ultimately, there's no horizon, so that really makes it harder to get excited for it.
Yeah, and that's something that's very much you as well, right? You like to do things where you can see it going somewhere, rather than just like a one-off thing. At any rate, good luck in that. This week on the show, with that kind of a downer, we've got the Strixhaven Sunset show. We're going to say goodbye to Strixhaven, a set that, at least in my mind, exceeded expectations by the end of it. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty on that on the show this week. Before we do, though, let's mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. This place to go for everything you need, including the next D&D themed set. What is it called? Adventures into the whatever?
Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
There we go, the Forgotten Realms. And if you want to pre-order that, you can head over to Channel Fireball right now and get your pre-orders in. Once they're able to ship it to you, they'll send it out. And you'll get it in your hands just as quickly as possible. They also have multiple ways that you can get into these things, crates and boxes and singles and all that kind of stuff. So head over to Channel Fireball for your pre-order for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and get ahead of that one, because boy, that set is replacing what used to be the core set, which was, trying to get back to like kind of core fantasy flavor. And, they also tended to make those sets a bit more simple as a potential entry point for newer players. The D&D one, though, is a different beast altogether, and it looks pretty complicated. There's a lot going on. There's some new card types. They're trying out some new stuff. And then, of course, the crossover element as well looks interesting, particularly for people that are fans of Dungeons & Dragons. So, yeah, pre-order that over at Channel Fireball. While you're there, you can sign up for CFB Pro and get all the latest and greatest from some of the best magic minds in the world over there as well. And you can check out even the free side of the content. I just had a video go up where I drafted the Chromatic Cube on Arena, for example, and that's still free. You can find that on YouTube or over at Channel Fireball. If you do end up getting anything over there, if you'd use the affiliate code LR, I'd appreciate it. And yeah, that's that. As far as supporting the show directly, Patreon is the way that we do that. You can head over to patreon.com/limited resources. If this show has, helped your game out, if you feel like you've won some extra booster packs and you want to give back to the show, Patreon's the way to do it. It's fully flexible, fully transparent. You know exactly how it works. You can quit anytime. You can adjust anytime. And that's how we like it. And that's one of the reasons that we decided to go with Patreon all those years ago. Patreon.com/limited resources. Now, as a patron, you do also get to be, you get to access to the Patreon feed, which is basically just, it's patron only. So, you have to be a patron to to be able to access it. But we also use it as a way to interact with our most dedicated listeners. We'll ask questions on there. We'll give them a chance to ask questions to us. And one of the things you get access to is a Patreon question of the week. And let's see, where should this one come from here? I haven't actually picked it up, but I do have it in front of me. This is kind of interesting. So this one comes from actually somebody also named Marshall Cheney, who says, I really enjoy it when LSV talks game design. I do too, by the way, Marshall. And he wants to know if there's like a developer blog or some other place where you talk about that stuff, or if it's just an occasional bonus to your Magic content.
I don't have a place where I specifically write about game design. So yeah, I guess it's just kind of like on this show is when I'll talk about it. Sometimes if it's relevant in an article or something like that, I'll talk about it. But for the most part, no, that's not something I tend to write a dedicated column about.
Okay, but but to back up what Marshall's saying there, I mean, I view that as one of your great strengths on the show. Of the many, you actually have quite a package for being a podcast co-host. But one of them is definitely your work in game design and the way that you can translate sort of the underpinnings of what's going on, but also see it from a competitive player's perspective and marrying those two things. So I often try to tap into that part of your brain. And a good example would be the show that we're going to do today. We'll certainly talk about what were the wins and the losses from a game design perspective. So you'll get a little dose of that today. Okay. Thanks for the question. One last crack-a-pack for Strixhaven here, Luis. Let's get into it. Can I get a Mizzix's Mastery just the one time? First card out is Inkling Summoning. This did end up being, considered the best of the summoning cards. That's not bad. Pillar Drop Warden. I played a lot of Pillar Drop Wardens in my day. Not a high pick, but certainly a card that you can put in your deck. Archway Commons. Love me an Archway Commons. I think I'm the only one, though. Springmane Servant. Oh, Springmane Servant actually won an award. So you have to hang on and see which one it won. But it did get there. Hunt for Specimens. Boy, that one went up in value a lot from the early stages of the format to the middle once we kind of started to figure out how learning and lessons worked. Vortex Runner, sure. Twin Scroll Shaman. Never got there. Professor of Zoomancy. This is the 17 Lands All-Star card here.
Oh, yeah.
The one that really kind of crushed the ratings. Study Break. That card went up a bit for us as well as a good aggro enabler. Charge Through. Womp didn't get there. For our uncommons, we have Fortifying Draft, which is definitely a front runner for a card I never play but lose to sometimes. It didn't take the award. We'll get to that in a bit, but it's on the list. Containment Breach, which was the 2 green lesson that destroys an artifact or enchantment. So fine. Lorehold Apprentice. Now this card was a flop. This is the red-white 2/2 with Magecraft, blah, blah, blah. Makes your spirits tap to do damage to the opponent or something. I don't think I ever had anybody do this to me. Our rare is Fury Calm Snarl, which is the red-white dual. And that leaves our what's it called card, and it is Revitalize. 1 and a white instant draw a card, gain 3 life. Wow, we got a bad pack for our last one, Luis. This pack sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just on Inkling Summoning here, I guess. I don't think I see an alternative.
Is this the worst pack we ever opened?
It's pretty bad. Inkling Summoning is a good first pick, but obviously, rather a satisfactory first pick. It's not a good first pick, but So a bit of a bust.
All right, Strixhaven. Well, thanks for giving us that on the way out. All right, let's get into the Sunset Show for Strixhaven. A lot to cover here. Luis, if you could summarize the set in one sentence, what would it be?
Learn those lessons.
Oh, that
is what Strixhaven is going to be remembered by, and it is one of the most impactful kind of parts of the format figuring out how lesson and learn interacted, just how good those things are, all of that was integral to the set's success.
It was, and it was unclear at the beginning when we first saw the cards how impactful they would be, and they ended up being the thing that defined the format. My one sentence was a well-executed retake on a set revolving around 5 2-color pairs. So to me, that's the other thing that stands out big picture. And we should talk about this before we get into the nitty gritty is, fundamentally, this set was another take at guilds, right? Like this is like, okay, we've done guilds a lot. They've already ran that back a couple of times, Boros and all that. And now they're like, well, what if we reimagined the guilds really, right? I mean, these are just kind of, Strixhaven's almost like an excuse to do that. So instead of Simic, we get Quandrix. Well, what does that look like? And of course, they did it in this school theme thing, which was clearly like a Harry Potter reference of some sort. And that it looks like they just wanted to say, what if we did our own take on that? And they kind of came back to, well, we're going to end up doing the 2-color pairs that we've already done. I imagine that had to be a big decision, right? I mean, from a design game design standpoint, this does step a bit on the things that they've built up. I mean, there's people that have Simic tattoos, for crying out loud. And now it's like, well, never mind. Now it's Quandrix, right? Like that had to be a big decision for them.
Yeah, it is definitely, you're tapping into kind of the same well as Ravnica when you're doing this. And part of what you're going to need to do your best at is like make it so it doesn't feel like Bizarro Ravnica. So they did. I think that's part of the reason they had things like the Lorehold theme being not an aggressive one. Lorehold and Boros play very differently. Simic and Quandrix, not so differently. Right. Is it in Prismari? Also not so differently, like in terms of their overall identities. But I think that they did what they could there to try to make it such that these different cards and different guilds didn't feel just like a rehash of Ravnica. How well they did that. That's what we're going to talk about today.
Do you think that they'll go forward with these? Like, do you think we'll see more sets with this? Or like we'll see the other 5-color pairs as a set? Like that's kind of the obvious next step, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty likely that we're going to see like the guild setup is just a good one. Like
it is.
It's a pretty nice one. Like having all 5 colors represented, having all of them do, like the things that they want to do. And there are some advantages and drawbacks to having 5 color pairs, but it's such a strong setup that I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it, not in the near future, but it's something that comes back every now and then. And I think part of the reason to do Strixhaven as well is you can't just keep going back to Ravnica. You can't just go return to Ravnica. So Ravnica is kind of tapped out for a little bit, at least. I would be surprised if we went back there too soon.
Yeah, I mean they have to do a blue-white college, right? Like we have to figure out what that looks like. So that I'm sure is something that we'll see down the line. And it is interesting. One other thing before we get into the the more specific stuff is you did mention that there's some costs associated with doing only 5 color pairs and that you effectively exclude the others. And that was the case here. And interestingly, we usually see that when they do this, of the 5, one of them is usually bad enough. Like getting that balance correct is so difficult, apparently, that one of them gets left behind quite often, if not 2. And we did see that here to an extent where it's kind of interesting because, again, there's a lot of things going on big picture with the set, but we're focused on the limited aspect of it. How does the draft format work? And if you told me, well, we're going to chop away half of the normal available options and focus in on the other half, and then some of those aren't going to be good, that feels like risky territory to me, but it always just kind of works. It's like, I don't know. I do wonder, like, what if the only color pairs that were good were ones that, a given player just didn't really jive with or didn't really like? I wonder if you give up a bit of design equity there, for limited players.
Yeah, it's always tough when you're cutting off potentially half of the decks that are in the format. So you're not gonna easily end up like in a normal set of Magic, right? When there's 10 color pairs, if you miss on a couple, 3, even 4, still doesn't feel particularly imbalanced. When there's 5 and you miss on 1, which is what happened here, and kind of 1.5 because Witherbloom also sucked, Lorehold clearly being the worst, you do end up drafting like Silver Quill or Teamer a lot of the time, and that constrains the world. And I really did enjoy Strixhaven. I played a lot of Strixhaven and ended up, going really deep on it. But past a certain point, I did start to get to the point where it's like, yeah, okay, I guess, this is now getting to the point where like you're drafting Teamer or Silver Quill every single time.
Yeah. And I definitely felt that way. Yet I still also did the same thing as you. I drafted a hell of a lot of this set, and I never really lost my will to do so. So, I guess it can work out anyway, as long as whatever's left over is good enough. Okay, let's get into the nitty gritty here. What did turn out to be the best archetypes? You were saying that you felt that Lorehold, and to a lesser extent, but still significantly, Witherbloom kind of flopped.
Yeah, I think Teamer, so Quandrix and Prismari, and then Silver Quill might have been the best archetype, but Lorehold, I think, was pretty clearly the worst, and Witherbloom was also not spectacular.
Yeah, they just didn't really come together. You could sometimes put a pile of cards together in Witherbloom that had very specific synergies or were just good on rate and maybe get there, but Lorehold, it felt like the whole, the card, and we'll actually mention this card a little bit further here as well, is like Quintorius, right?
Yeah,
a perfect build around. Yeah, just a perfect build around for the archetype, right? It's got decent stats. It does exactly what you want. And it hits at one of the core things about this idea of like a card leaving the graveyard or whatever, triggering stuff. And I mean, how many times did you lose to a Quintorius, let alone see one on the battlefield? It was almost unheard of. And again, that's the type of card that if you read it, you make some assumptions about the environment that the card like that would be put into. And you're like, yeah, that's probably a really good card. And it's just like, it's not. It just completely failed. And I think that really shows even a push card like that does it. And for me, the best archetype was Teamer. I almost forced it every time. I was just like, there's plenty enough cards. And, this is late in the format, but I mean, I was not losing with it. It was one of those decks that I felt like there was plenty of options to get, and that I could just sort of put together somewhere between a good to great version of it effectively every draft. And I just was doing that. And it also happens to be a really fun deck to play because you get to do like, 7 and 8 mana spells and these big things and all that too. And also I felt like I was taking advantage of some underdrafted cards. The commons was one of them. The tap, the pay a mana to tap land and then it gets any color. And then the letter acceptance as well was a card that I was happily playing 2 or sometimes 3 of and just turboing out these, make 2 4/4s or, one of the uncommons or whatever. And, most of the decks just couldn't come back from that effectively. So to me, it was really about Teamer. And then sometimes I would play Quandrix or Prismari alone with like either a tiny splash or no splash. And then occasionally you could get me to play Silver Quill, but I was kind of like, I don't know. Didn't really feel forced to do that very often. So Teamer for life, I guess, out of this set. I'm
just wondering what it would look like if you actually were forcing it instead of almost forcing it, because
it'd look really similar.
Because I'm not seeing a big distinction.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I guess if you open Shadrix and get past Killian, you probably would draft Silver Quill. But
yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess the difference in my mind is I didn't say before I was going to draft, I'm literally going to force this and see what happens, but I really was. I really was just like, there was just, I didn't see the other cards at some point, so at that point you're pretty much just forcing. Anyway, yeah. So Teamer, baby. Which cards were we most wrong about during the set reviews, or maybe ones that surprised us one way or the other? And I have to say there was a lot. Like this set had a lot of shifting going on early on. There were a lot of on rate cards that looked fine. Particularly cards that I really tend to value highly normally, like cards that are good fine when you play them and then are decent mana sinks later. The two cards that come to mind are Wormhole Serpent and what was the 1 in a G 2/2, and you can pay 4 in a G to double its power.
Reckless
Amplimancer, right? Like those both look just very solid to me. Like I thought we would see, especially the Amplimancer on the battlefield a lot, and it ended up plummeting. The Wormhole Serpent was barely playable. I mean, you could put it in your deck, I guess, but it wasn't even anything you thought about ever. And I think the thing that overshadows all of any type of wrong about during the set review stuff was lessons and learn, right? We were speculative on it, but we didn't know for sure what those would actually look like and how often we would be playing. How low would we go on the learn cards? Turns out all the way down, basically, maybe one exception, the 1 in a red one. But everything else is like you just play the learn cards. How often do you have lessons? All the time. How often do you have a couple of lessons to choose from? Basically all the time if you want it. And after knowing that, mana sinks actually, mediocre mana sinks like the ones I just named went down a lot. Like they are not where you wanted to be at the end of the day. And so those just basically fell off the map entirely for me.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting trying to figure out what we mean by wrong during the set reviews when it comes to learn lesson, because whenever we're evaluating such a new kind of mechanic, we always know that we might just be off. So we do leave a little bit of an escape hatch of, if this mechanic ends up being really, really good, then something like Cram Session will be playable. Granted, we weren't high on Cram Session. That card was better than we thought. I'm not saying that we don't get things wrong or we can't get things wrong in this regard. I'm just saying whenever we're evaluating something really, really new, we always have the undercurrent of like, yeah, we know that this one could be off. But we definitely did underrate especially the more minor learn cards. Turns out like, yeah, Field Trip I don't think was tough to call as like, hey, this is probably going to be fine. Or Professor of Symbology. But then you look at Cram Session, Arcane Subtraction. These are cards that ended up pulling their weight. I mean, they're not the best cards, but they definitely did their job. So
for sure.
I definitely felt that, and I think overall the spells cards ended up performing pretty well, like you mentioned. Cards like Serpentine Curve and Leyland Invocation ended up making the cut basically. Well, Leyland Invocation basically every time. Serpentine Curve was part of some very good decks, right?
Which I think we gave it a D or even less than that, in the review. So, and that shifted around a bunch of cards that I thought were going to, see play more. So really, I mean, this was a big one. The biggest question mark was definitely lesson learned though. And we knew that was at play when we did the review. And after we got our answer, everything kind of shifted around those cards.
Yeah. So. And it turns out all the lesson cards were good. All the learn cards were good. They all had their uses. Right.
And, but remember, like when we're doing the review, we don't even know if it's like you're going to build a lesson learned deck or you're not, right? Or you're going to dabble or you're not. Or, and again, how low do you go? So those were really the big questions. And we actually called that out in the review and we got our answer pretty quickly. It was like, hey, these are really good. And as we started to go up, what were some of the most underrated cards? I know a card that stands out to me as underrated, and we can kind of pick our time frame here, right? Is Test of Talents. That's a card that I still think is kind of underrated. Some of the things that you could tell the designers were working with the format were, okay, we want to have lesson learned be core to the format. Great. But in order to make that work, we want to have some of the lessons be effectively creatures. Okay, cool. Except for they can't be. Okay, so what are we going to do with that if they all have to be sorceries or whatever? Well, we're going to make them into a sorcery that makes a creature token. Okay, cool. So now that you have that kind of framework out, there's two things that jump out. One, a card like Negate or a better version of it like Test of Talents goes up in value if it can sometimes counter creatures, right? The whole point of Negate and the reason why you often don't main deck it is because it can't counter creatures, and creatures are so critical to how limited plays out. Well, if 20, 30, 40% of the creatures are actually spells, well, now all of a sudden cards like Negate and Test of Talents goes up. And that also affected other cards that were underrated, like Bury-in books, right? Because now bounce spells are removal. your opponent spent 5 mana for their 4/4. And if you have a 2 mana bounce spell, you can just send it packing. And you can tell the card, Luis, that really stands out as this sort of like flag waving is Divide by Zero.
Yep.
Right. Where they're just
I
like,
knew that's the one you were going to mention.
yeah, they probably had it originally as, just bounce something. And they were probably like, we don't really need this to kill a Leyline Invocation token or a 4/4 or any, a 2/1 flyer or whatever, and be able to do this spell thing. So they went back and tweaked it. And that to me is like, that kind of sums up some of the stuff that was underrated early because we didn't know that yet.
Yeah, I think that the bounce thing is a very good point. I also think that the expensive cards were underrated. Like, it's not like you look at Bookworm or Explosive Welcome and you think, wow, this card's weak. You just think, okay, I mean, this card obviously is powerful, but how often are you getting to 8? It turns out we just put every 7+ cost card in our deck, and we're happy to have 4 of them or 5 of them because the format was such and also the card support was such that you really could ramp all these things out. So
that's right.
I think that all the expensive cards ended up working out much, much better than it looked like they were going to initially.
Yeah, and then the other category of underrated cards, particularly early on, were learn cards, right? And in my mind, it was like there were some good learn cards here. Like, okay, I want these. And then it was like, I'll go down a little bit in quality and see how that turns out. And then you're like, okay, well, that actually was still pretty good. So I'll go down a little further. And next thing you know, you're kind of like all the learn cards, right? Like, again, the only one that didn't really see extensive play was First Day of Class or whatever it's called. Right. Yeah. And, even that you could put in your deck if you needed. But, Gain 4 life learn it was like, yeah, okay, sure. Right. Make a 1/1 past learn is like great. I mean, that's like one of the best commons in its color. So, those ones, of course, all got bumped up along the scale. And then again, one way to view these things when we shift around cards is if one card or a group of cards moves up the pick order, that means that the other cards need to go down. And so something has to get bumped out from those. What were some of the most controversial cards?
Starting early, Expanded Anatomy looked like one of the mediocre learn cards that ended up being maybe, discounting Mascot Exhibition, maybe the top 2, like Past Environmental Sciences. It was the card I felt the most not having in a lot of my decks. Mm-hmm. Granted, some decks really wanted an elemental summoning or a fractal summoning or something like that. Like all the summonings were really good, but Expanded Anatomy was just an outrageously good card, especially compared to how weak that card would be if it didn't have Learn. Like that was the biggest delta. Whereas Inkling Summoning, right, 3 mana for a 2/1 flyer, yeah, it's okay in your deck and very good to learn for. Expanded Anatomy would be generally pretty bad in your deck and awesome to learn for. So it was just funny how much that changed based on the adding the learn mechanic. Yeah,
for sure. That was absolutely huge. Other cards that got talked about a lot, Frost Trickster was kind of interesting, right? I had so many people send me that on Twitter when they previewed it, and it was like, whoa, right? Like, and honestly, I actually feel like it's a little underrated as we exit the format because people kind of got down on it a little bit, but we did have to bump it down, right? Like, I think you could have placed a pretty easy bet that Frost Trickster would be the best blue common by the end of the format, and that didn't end up being true. And we'll cover the best commons in a little bit, but it's not Frost Trickster, and it's definitely not Frost Trickster. So that says a lot about when they push a card that was already one of the better commons in its set with Frostlings, and they just give it flying, like maybe the best thing that they can give it as far as keyword abilities, and it doesn't even take the number 1 slot. It really says a lot, about that. And I think people like me probably had a bit of a hard time letting go of that. I'm just going, this is so good. And again, I still think it's still really good, but but it's not the best common. What other one stood out to you?
Star Pupil was one that's the 1 mana 1/1 that when it dies, it's basically modular. It gives its ++1 counter to someone else. Mm-hmm. That and Guiding Voice both looked like, oh, these are part of like an aggro Silver Quill tokens deck. Turns out Guiding Voice is great and Star Pupil is not. And I know that they got lumped together a bit in the beginning and were both very appealing cards to people.
What was your favorite artwork on a card in this set?
I like Poet's Quill by Anna Fair. Just Poet's Quill just has, I don't know. I like that kind of like stylized artwork. I always think it looks really good.
Yeah, that was a really good one. Mine was Ether Helix by Torstein Norstrand. And boy, he went deep. Like that card is, there's like a scale mage down in the lower left corner. And then it's just like this huge kind of, Northern Lights looking thing going on. Really beautiful. And, the artwork for this set was very strong too. They did a very good job. But that was my favorite. What were the best build around cards in this set? Kind of interesting. They did give us some. I think that Lesson and Learn took up a lot of the space that might normally have been here. But Cody, can I interest you in a Cody?
Yeah, Cody did some good work. You also had the Spellcraft or Magecraft build around. So like, from commons like Quandrix Pledge Mage to rares like Archmage Emeritus, I felt like these decks came together really, really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you feel like, because, we define a build around here, right, as you take it and then it changes at your pick what you would take over in your later picks in a significant way, right? Right. Do you think that, like, if you had an Archmage Emeritus or a Quandrix Pledge Mage, that you needed to do that?
Change your pick orders? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, because I just sort of felt like all my decks just always triggered Magecraft kind of anyway. Maybe a little tweak here or there, but I didn't feel like I was like, well, I have to keep my spell quantity high. I can't take this good creature here. I just need to take this spell very often.
You didn't have to go super deep on it because the spells in general were very good already about doing that. Like all the spells you wanted in your deck, also spells replaced creatures because of the Learn Lesson thing. Like you could not try and still have an extremely strong Magecraft build. It just did happen that once you had those Magecraft cards, you did want to go a little further. Like it was worth putting the effort in, but it wasn't like you had to completely change your pick order because so much of the picks already you wanted these cards. But it did take some adjustment. Yeah, like an example would be another build around was Reflective Golem, right? And like if you take a Reflective Golem, you actually are changing your picks to like, hey, I need stuff that targets this creature so I can try to take advantage of it. What about Dinah? I actually thought she was a little weak. This is the black-green 1/3 that, like, whenever you gain life, they lose a life, and you can sack a creature to give her, like, +X/+O or whatever. Yeah, like, there were things, but it didn't really happen, right? Right. Yeah. I didn't think it ended up being, like, super great. Plumb the Forbidden with it or whatever. Mavinda was a card that, again, similar to Reflective Golem, you would want things that targeted. Rutha, I don't know if I'd call Rutha full build around, but oh my God, that card was great. And you certainly kept it in mind when you did. All right, here's the big question, though, because I'm going to tell you right now, we're giving the award to Cody. So, Cody, you win for best build around. Harness Infinity. Did anybody actually harness any Infinity, or did the Infinity stay out into the universe? So I had one deck where Infinity got harnessed, and it kind of hooked me onto trying to do that every time. It did not work every time, I can tell you that much. But I did love it. It did have some pretty good action in that case. So yeah, I think that Harness Infinity is a pretty fun one. Yeah, that's like the most ambitious thing to go for in the format, probably, right? I mean, it was awesome if you could do it. If you could just draft this like controlling Witherbloom deck with tons of like removal spells and like a lot of ways to get cards into the graveyard, it put you in a pretty good spot. Yeah, because I mean, those are effectively all spells you're getting back too, so it's like really, really strong. And then I wanted to give kind of a dishonorable mention to Lorehold Excavation and Quintorius, which both should have been really good build arounds, but just missed super hard. So womp. Cody, though, is the winner for best build around in the set. Was this a Prince or a Pauper set? Oh, this is definitely a Pauper set. The Learn Lesson were so much of an impactful part of the set that I feel like you ended up being pretty happy, even if your deck was mostly low rarity cards. Yeah. What's the "it's a bad card, but I love it anyway" winner here? So for me, Harness Infinity actually is it. Because like I said, it was probably the thing that was probably the worst for me, honestly, was that I did go off with Harness Infinity once.
Oh yeah,
and that all of a sudden
was it the first time you had it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
No, it was the first time I put it in a deck. Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first time I had
access setup,
to it.
man.
but after that, it was just like, yeah, I guess this is really what I want to be doing here. So
yeah. Yeah, you could chase that high for the rest of the format if you get it to go once. My card was a little lower on the totem pole. It's Letter of Acceptance. I know that this card is not an amazing Magic card, but I honestly played a lot of it doesn't track how many you have on Arena. Like we used to have a category on this for what was your most drafted common on Magic Online, and I wouldn't be surprised if Letter of Acceptance would have been mine. The I literally never win with it, but it always seemed to beat me card for me, Exponential Growth. Stupid get you out of nowhere. Like I thought we had a Magic game going and then boom, it was just over.
That's a great answer. That would have been one of mine as well. I have another one, which is a Tenured Inkcaster, the 5-mana 2/2 that puts a counter on something and then pings for 1 every time something with a counter attacks. And my reason is that like when my opponent had this card, they always attacked me, played it and attacked me and drained me 3 times. And I just didn't put this card in my deck all that often.
Yeah, you didn't take it high enough. Other people were snapping it off.
Yeah.
Also,
apparently.
I did get hit by Reject a few times, and I got to tell you, that feels real bad. All right, what was my opponent played this, so now I must win or quit Magic forever card of the set. I have mine. Turn 1 Excavated Wall. Your move is like it's on the line. Your career's on the line now. If your opponent played a turn 1 Excavated Wall, there is no reason to do that in this format. There's nothing going on with Excavated Wall, and now you have to beat that player or retire from the game.
Yeah, I mean, Excavated Wall is a great answer. For me, Resculpt, that was the instant that exiled a creature and put a 4/4 into play.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that card, the card, I guess, technically had one use. And that exact one use was with the environment or the elemental expressionist, the genie, the 4 hybrid blue-red mana 4/4. Because if you cast Resculpt on something, the genie, and then targeted it with the genie's trigger, your creature would get exiled and you would get 2 4/4s. So
wow. Combo assembled.
So you really got there, you know? So yeah.
Wow. What was the biggest groan test for the set? The card that they play and you're like, really? Really?
I mean, it has to be when they cast a learn card and picked up Mascot Exhibition.
Oh, for sure.
You would get to see that for like multiple turns in the future and just be like, wow, all right, I guess this is coming and I can't beat it.
Yeah, it's the long groan. That's great. Yeah, we have to give a honorable mention to Exponential Growth as well, where you're like, hey, we're playing a good game of Magic. I've got a thing. I've stabilized. You've got this. Let's see where this goes. And then they're just like, kill you. And you're like, okay, never mind. But you're right. Definitely learning, particularly playing the Luis Scott-Vargas and playing Field Trip into Mascot Exhibition. That is the one. What was the most frustrating, quote, bad card to lose to? Or what card will you not miss playing against her that really annoyed the crap out of you? And any of them can fit in there.
Honestly, it was still Exponential Growth.
Exponential Growth is kind of running the show here, isn't it?
Well, if you think about it, it's kind of the perfect card, right? It's a card that does nothing most of the time, but then when you go off with it, it's unbeatable. It's just the best card in the world. So
yeah.
That
we should look on 17 lands. I bet you it has the biggest disparity between like when you draw it but don't cast it and when you draw it but cast it and winning the game versus not, because it basically wins the game every time you resolve it. For me, it was Owl and Shield Mage. This card just freaking cursed me the whole time because I'm playing my very fair, very reasonable teamer decks. I'm not doing anything to hurt anybody. I'm just ramping, drawing cards, casting 7-drops, right? And I'm being a really responsible Magic player. I'm conserving my removal for the things that matter. Yeah, you got off to a quick start, Silver Quill Mage. You did. You got me down to 8. But you know what? I've got a removal spell or two in my hand and I'm good to go. And then they go Owl and Shield Mage. And I'm like, okay. I'll use my removal spell. I'm down to 5. And then they go Owl and Shield Mage. And it's like, I save my mana. I should get paid off for this. And that stupid card, because if you don't have a blocker for it, it smashes you and finishes the game. And if you have removal, it still has attack. So I hate Owl and Shield Mage, and I don't want to ever see one of those stupid things again. All right. Easiest in a long time. And this is saying a lot too. What was the bombiest bomb, the card you hope to open, pack one, pick one in your draft or open up in your sealed pool?
It's got to be Mascot Exhibition. It's just not even close to being close.
It's not even close to being close, which says a lot. Because there are cards in this set like Sparring Regimen, Poet's Quill, Blot Out the Sky, Mizzix's Mastery, Approach of the Second Sun, Gnarled Professor, blah, blah, blah. I can go down the list. They're all amazing. But it is not close. And I don't say that lightly. Mascot Exhibition is on another level. We talked about it after the Arena Open, the one where you had the 2 Mascot Exhibitions, and we talked about it with Sirkovitz too. And it really is in its own category because of the access that you get to it. You know, Luis, what did you have? 6 ways to get it?
I think I had 6 or 7.
Yeah, 6 or 7 ways. So that's 6 or 7 copies. So if you have a Sparring Regimen, that's great. Every time you draw it, you're going to be happy. If it's in your opening hand, it's fantastic. It's even decent later in the game. Cool. That's really great. What if you had 7 of them?
Well, and even better, you don't have 7 Sparring Regimens. You have 7 ways to get Sparring Regimen, but also sometimes they can be something else if you need something else.
Yes, they're actually better than having 7 Sparring Regimens when you just need to kill something. It would be really bad
to just put 7 Mascot Exhibitions in your deck. But It's really strong to put a bunch of field troops in your deck that can go get it. My favorite game was like one of the first games where I went, I think it was turn 2-0, but it was like turn 3, field trip, get Mascot Exhibition. Turn 4, field trip, get Mascot Exhibition, and then my opponent conceded. Like, they didn't let me play it. It's just like, on turn 5, guess what I'm going to play? Well, you know what I'm going to play on turn 6?
It's incredible. Normally, on this, we'll have like a clear kind of front runner, but you could maybe throw an argument at it. No argument will be accepted. It is Mascot Exhibition. All right. This is an interesting one, too, where I think that things aren't 100% consensus here. What is the best common for each color? White. Combat Professor. That's correct, right? That's just Combat Professor.
I like Combat Professor. It's just a good amount of pressure, good amount of stats, good ability even the turn you play it. So I think that seems pretty clear cut. The one thing that's funny about it is Study Break, a card that looked like it was medium, might be the second best white common.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And that's a bullet, right? I mean, I would have put it opposite of that at first. Blue. Burying Books, number 1. And it is a significant portion ahead of Frost Trickster or whatever you have second. So that one to me is Stamp It, Burying Books. Yep. Black. This one's hard. Mage Hunter's Onslaught seems to be kind of the on the front, hey, you're getting access to a unconditional removal spell for a reasonable cost, even with a little bit of upside to it. But you also get Lash. What is it called? Lash of Malice. Lash of Malice, which is a very efficient way to deal with a lot of problematic cards that pop up. And then we got to say, Hunt for Specimens has to be on the list too, right? I mean, Hunt for Specimens is the type of card that, again, went up a lot in value. And it's one of the better learn cards because it actually affects the board in potentially both halves of it. What do you have as the best black common? I still put Mage Hunter's Onslaught.
I actually think that Lash of Malice, the first Lash is probably better, but I think it's very close. You didn't. I don't remember choosing between them too frequently. They're both premium. And I'm looking at it also in the context of Silver Quill, which really gets rewarded for cheap spells because it has like a good aggressive Magecraft theme.
Yes.
In Witherbloom, Mage Hunter's Onslaught was likely better, but even then, just having that Lash to make sure your opponent didn't get out ahead was pretty important. I'm probably on Lash of Malice as a result.
Okay. Yeah, very, very close between those two. Red, again, we can go back to the no debate, heated debate. Right? Yeah. I mean, that was it. Yeah, that was the one you wanted. Super efficient removal. Probably best removal at common in the set. Maybe Burying Books is better. Green. Now, this one's another one that I don't know. Mage Duel is high on my list. Professor of Zoomancy, right, as we learned from 17 Lands data, is an overperformer and might be the best green common. And then there's also Field Trip, which was a really solid learn card as well. Where do you come down here?
So green didn't have a standout common in that all of these cards are fairly close together. Also, like we're not counting the hybrid cards, but Quandrix Pledge Mage was very close here. When I was drafting Quandrix and looking at these cards, I think Mage Duel overall is the one that leads to most. Like if you want to do a mini groan test of like they're playing a normal turn, you're feeling good about it, and then with their last mana they cast Mage Duel.
Yes.
How do you feel about the turn now? And
It's just depressing. Yeah,
especially when they're like, turn 3 Pledge Mage, and you play a creature, and they're like, all right, Field Trip, and you're like, okay, Mage Duel, kill your guy. I've got a 4/4 now. Yeah, that's attacking for 5 this turn, and you're like, whatever.
And all of a sudden the game goes away. All right, so we'll give it to Mage Duel, but maybe Professor, maybe Field Trip on there too. This next one is interesting for this set because it wasn't as clear to me. What is the mythic uncommon for this set?
And I actually think this one is there is one that stands out to me.
There is to me too, as far as power level, but didn't resonate with me as much. Are you talking Igneous Inspiration?
I think Igneous Inspiration is just the best uncommon.
I do too.
So strong.
Is it a mythic uncommon?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's 3 mana to kill a creature and draw a good card. You usually have to like work for that. You just don't have to work for that. Plus, sometimes it just nugs your opponent.
Yeah. Yeah. Card was absolutely amazing. Other cards that came to mind were Quandrix Apprentice. That card ended up being absurd. I really like Quandrix Cultivator and Rutha. I think I think Rutha to me would be the one that would be closest as the kind of thing, but it didn't really get there for me personally. Now I'm not going to put this up for the award, but Bookworm, you give me that Bookworm and I don't feel like I can lose. But yeah, Igneous Inspiration is going to win for Mythic Uncommon for the set. What's the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the most last picked.
I've got Square Up. It was just a complete trap. Like, yes, this is the card that makes the creature into a 4/4. Like, I get you put it on your fractal and it's like +4/+4. In practice, I never played the card, and any time my opponent had that card in their deck, they tended to lose pretty badly.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out that we've had combat tricks that were actually just +4/+4, and they're fringe playable. So, and this isn't that. So this is worse than that in most scenarios. So yeah, we'll give it to Square Up. Honorable mention to Dark Ritual. Going back to our early discussions of the format. What card was the most begrudgingly playable?
For me, I think Vortex Runner was the card I played in decks that were missing a playable.
Oh, that's really good.
You would never be like hyped to play it, but you would put it in your deck, and sometimes it was a 3/3 unblockable, which obviously is fine.
Oh man. So I had Springmane Servan, but I like your answer better. We're gonna give it to Vortex Runner here. That is exactly on that fringe. It is the perfect 24th card that sometimes make it in. So most begrudgingly playable. Congratulations, Vortex Runner. You won the race. Is there a card you'll miss drafting?
For me, Eureka Moment is a card that
yes.
I had a lot of fun playing. It checks a lot of the boxes I like, which is drawing extra cards and putting lands into play to play those cards.
Oh yeah.
Though honestly, there's nothing like having the comfort of Environmental Sciences at your beck and call. So Environmental Sciences is one I definitely will miss as well.
For me, I genuinely will miss drafting the stuff that costs 7+ mana, 7 or 8, Magma Opus, Bookworm, make 2 4/4s, all of those type of cards. You don't get to do that every time. As we mentioned earlier, sometimes you look at a card like Bookworm or Magma Opus and you go, well, is this format going to allow me to get to 8 mana? Remember, that's about half of your mana. And if you're running 17, that means you need to get to about 20 cards left in your deck, before you're on average going to have that much mana available. That doesn't happen every game. Thankfully, this format is very well suited for it. And it was one of the many defining things about the format was that you could go very big on mana. And I really enjoyed that. I'll miss opening up as an 8-drop and being like, sweet, and just taking it, not having to think about it. Because those big, exciting plays create a lot of tension in the game where are you going to get to that mana? Did you build your deck to get to that mana? And then is it enough to get you out of the mess that you find yourself in? And, most formats, those just end up in the sideboard. So I'll definitely miss drafting the super expensive stuff. Really liked the discarded to make a treasure thing. I thought that was just a super sweet addition. And I'd love to see that on a few more selective cards going forward. it's not like it's great if you have to do it. I mean, you're pitching a card for a temporary mana source. It is a punishment, but it lets you play, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times it was like, I just need to do this so I can get on board and not die. And then, you know, at least you have a game going. So I'll miss those ones. What was the LSVist card and the Martialist card?
I think Rutha was one that really exemplified how I like to play games, where you're like, you play this, you sit there for a turn, so you try to get max value out of all your cards. The amount of times I Rutha'd like a pop quiz when I really shouldn't have been doing that, it was probably too high. And overall, Rutha led to some pretty sweet game states.
Yeah. The real question is, like, do you block, right? Like, how much, you know, you play your Rutha on 3, they attack their 2/2, and do you block or not, right? And it's like, no, I have to protect my Rutha. For me, definitely the Martialist card in the set is Frost Trickster, for sure. Just tempo them out, get them in the air with a flyer. It's kind of perfect. What was my Soapboxiest card? You know, this set didn't, we did talk about mechanics and stuff a little bit more, but the ones that came to mind for me were Square Up, which I didn't like at the beginning because it's such a weak card, but it had really cool artwork and even a cool name. And then Strixhaven Stadium is kind of an LOL, right? Like, when people play that against you and all of a sudden you're playing this weird sub game, but it like really didn't jive with what I was trying to do. And I think I did lose one game ever to it, but like, you know, I won every other one, where Strixhaven Stadium just didn't really pull its weight. This one is kind of funny. So what card do you still have to read when it's cast against you? Now, my answer for this is actually really funny because of the way that we worded this particular award. It's what I'm really trying to say here is, what card do I still have to read when I have it in my hand? Because when it gets cast against you, you really don't have to read it at all, because the game ends and it's Crackle with Power. So don't bother reading it. You just lost if it goes on the stack.
Well, there's two places where I try to figure out what it does. One, it's in my hand and I'm trying to figure out if I can kill them. Yeah. The other is when they haven't played it, but they could play it, and I'm trying to figure out how much damage it'll do. And it's just almost like, okay, right. Yeah. How many red are in the cost?
It's impossible. I finally opened one and got to play it, and it was like, I figured out, okay, just get to 8 mana. Like, that's what you want to do. And then, like, you'll win the game. Kind of whatever you fire it off at. What about you? What card do you still have to read when people cast it?
Rush Rebirth. That's the black-green one that, like, if a creature dies, you look for a less cost creature. I think I got it right. But it's also confused because Infused with Vitality is the common that has a similar effect, except when the creature dies, you just bring it back. So
it's somewhat similar artwork, too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to some of the big questions here as we wind down Strixhaven here. From a design and development aspect, how did the set fare? How did the mechanics play out, and what were some of the wins and losses from your perspective?
I think overall the set fared well. It was a fun set. It was a solid take on a guild format. Like, it did the guild format proud. It wasn't bad, even though, you know, the guild format has some issues. It did a pretty good job on it. The Lorehold non-aggressive theme was cool in theory, but it actually sucked, which is a miss because it's much more costly to miss on 1 out of 5 traditionally draftable decks. Like, look, I drafted Celestia once. In Sealed, you would play off colors because that's just what you opened. But overall, I mean, every single draft but one, I drafted a color pair supported by the schools. So the fact that
Celestia deck was legendary, by the way.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah. But the fact that Lorehold was a miss, I mean, how many times you probably drafted the set? 100 times or something like that?
At least I drafted it a ton of times. Yeah.
Okay, let's say you drafted 120 times.
Yeah.
Right. How many drafts were you Lorehold? Like 3,
4, maybe 5, and that was only in the first week when I didn't know any better. Because
I drafted Lorehold a couple times, got just completely demolished every time, and just stopped doing it.
Yeah.
Like, because it wasn't even just, I drafted it twice and I don't win with it. It's like, no, I've drafted it probably 4 or 5 times. Plus, every time I play against it, it's just a joke how bad Lorehold is.
Yeah.
So I think that is a negative. Like, I think that is something that you look and be like, I kind of wish we buffed Lorehold a little bit.
I wanted to ask you about a follow-up on that. You mentioned briefly at the end there, you might buff it. Do you view this as simply they didn't put the power where it needed to be, but everything else was fine? Or was there something fundamentally about the way that they went for some weird stuff, right? This random spirits theme that wasn't really there. And then the cards leaving the graveyard payoffs, which didn't end up being an easy thing to make work either. Do you think it was fundamentally flawed, or they just didn't push the power level enough?
So this is a tricky question because there's always it's always a lot more complex than like yes or no. So from a power level perspective, you can almost always make something fly, right? You can like if they wanted the Lorehold Spirit Exile theme to be good, imagine they just took all the Lorehold cards and shaved a mana here and there, added some stats here and there. You would see these cards work. Yeah. If Tome Shredder was just a 3/3, or if it got +2 +1/+1 counters when you exiled, if Quintorius made 2 spirits or whatever, if Lorehold Apprentice was a plausible design that didn't look like it was made by a random computer, you could fix these things from a power level perspective. But that's the important part is power level is not when you're doing design. If you're doing a good job of it, you're not just looking at power level, because if you just look at power level, you're going to end up not capturing fun. And a more fundamental question is, was the Lorehold theme a fun one? I'd argue that the spirit stuff could have been fine. Like that I think was more of a power level question. Like the rate on making spirits and the rate on interacting with them was pretty low. Exiling cards from your graveyard, having them leave your graveyard, I don't think that's that fun of a mechanic.
What is the visual there? Is it something going to... I don't know. It's because they were like the research and archaeology department. Okay.
And
gotcha.
Looking at the past, which is clearly the graveyard in terms of Magic, and getting lessons from it. Bad choice of words. Learning things from it. Oh wait, they did it again. But
right on the nose.
But I don't think that that's like a flagship mechanic. So I don't think it's necessarily bad that the cards that did that weren't a little more pushed. Overall, I think that it was a fine theme overall. It's hard to take a stab at something these colors don't naturally do, which is not be aggressive. So I guess depending on how much development time you had, I would either look at maybe just making some of these cards a little bit better and canning Lorehold Apprentice. Again, that design really bad. But I could see you wanting to maybe rework the mechanics too. I don't know.
Okay.
I can't solve that right here, though I do think that Lorehold was ultimately not the most headliner of a mechanic, like not the most grabbing mechanic to begin with, and the power level was certainly low enough that at the end it wasn't something people played, and it wasn't something that people really were that interested in. I think it's just a lot less sticky than like the Quandrix, ramp kind of mechanic, or Prismari big spells and treasures. Like the whole treasures thing worked out really nicely.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense. It was cool. I don't know. It was a hit. And you didn't quite get there. Like Witherbloom, for example, Witherbloom was less powerful, but I don't consider it a full miss because you could still draft it and feel okay about it. And the theme there is a kind of time-tested one. Counters, life gain, life loss, the Magecraft angle to those things. It all kind of fit together nicely and was something that was intuitive and also pretty fun. So I think Witherbloom, maybe it was a little weaker, and that it would have been better if it was a little stronger, but it wasn't a miss like Lorehold. I wouldn't say it was a miss. And that's kind of what you get when you try weird mechanics, which is not to say you shouldn't try weird mechanics. It just means your failure rate's going to be higher.
Yeah, and that's a little tough when there's only 5 things, right? Like if you miss there, it's 20%. You're taking a bigger gamble when
there's only 5 colleges. Yeah. And it's so much easier to fail on like a graveyard exile theme than it is life gain or ramp, because they've done ramp and life gain so many times, they kind of know how it ticks. They have this other thing, and they're like, well, like you look at Quintorius, cards getting removed from your graveyard never naturally happen, whereas ramp is just describing games of Magic that happen whether or not you have ramp cards. Eventually you start casting expensive things. Right. And like life gain, that happens a lot more often than exiling cards from graveyard in terms of how often you would expect it to see it in the set. So Lorehold was the biggest miss. The biggest win, though, was Lesson Learned. Lesson Learned was awesome. Lesson Learned accomplished what is very clearly a goal of theirs, and I think a good goal, which is to give people a lot of options in Limited, to reduce variance and to let you play out games, but do it in a way that like still rewards people for making good decisions. So it's not reducing the various by too much, I don't think. And sometimes you don't have the right lesson cards and you have to draft them, and it all came together really nicely. I mean, you see this with like the double face cards in Zendikar, cycling, discounting the weird cycling deck, but just cycling in general in Ikoria or other sets that have cycling. These mechanics are all smoothing mechanics to make your limited games play out a little better. But I think this was a very, very, very good one. I think it was an A+. So lesson learned was awesome. And I have a slight concern, and we'll see if it's misplaced, that the dungeon cards from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms are going to feel a little close right on the heels of Lesson, because they are also a bunch of cards that say, instead of learn, they say venture, and instead of lessons, you just get to choose your dungeon output, but they're ultimately kind of the same thing. We'll see if they feel differently enough that it's not a big deal. But I do like these kind of mechanics in general, and I think one of the biggest wins of Strixhaven was pulling this off really well. We don't even have to speak that much about it because everyone who's played the format knows how well it came out.
Do you think that they were successful in differentiating the idea of colleges as two color pairs rather than the guilds that we're kind of all used to?
I think more successful than not. I still think Quandrix and Prismari don't feel that different from Simic and Izzet, really. But I think Silverquill feels quite a bit different than Orzhov. Not that Orzhov was like the most mechanically sound guild to begin with. Like, what does Orzhov do? If I just ask you.
Tax you, drain you? I don't really know. Yeah.
Yeah. And Lorehold, in that sense, was a success. It was very different than Boros. The fact that it didn't actually work out that well is a bit of a knock. And then Witherbloom's pretty close to Golgari in some ways, but the Magecraft aspect of it, I thought, went a long way. The fact that Witherbloom Apprentice and Pledge Mage were both very strong Magecraft cards and rewarded you for playing spells, that's really different than what Golgari's ever done. So I would say that they overall succeeded in having a guild-ish system with the color pairs feeling different from their predecessors.
Yeah. You know, the one I want to go back there is the big win, lesson learned. Boy, they must have put extra time into it, right? Because when you first see the cards, you're kind of like, well, the learn cards aren't that exciting. They're kind of a smaller effect on the game. And the lesson cards are not that exciting either. So why does this matter to me? Why do I care about this? But when you play out the games, you really get to the bottom of a lot of how to tweak these numbers and how much they probably had to really recognize from a big picture how to make these work. Because what you highlighted is true. If you can lower that variance down while not making it like training wheels, right? If you lower the variance too much, then it's less fun. There's less rewards for trying harder, for playing well. And that can be frustrating and lead people away. But you also don't want games decided by just raw variance where it's like you didn't even get to play Magic and have a chance at it. And Lesson and Learn really do, give you a lot to take away with regards to how low the power level can be while still tweaking these things. And I would love to see this mechanic or a version of this mechanic come back again. It just felt really like it opened up design space that wasn't there before. The fact that these cards that you could go get out of your sideboard were specific and narrow, but the cost of them was drafting them. And then, so you had to use a draft pick on them. And then that was the thing that you got with your learn trigger or whatever. That to me balanced out beautifully with these are conditional. They're not game breaking with a few exceptions, but they're conditional cards. And that really makes you open up your mind to like, well, how much better, I go back to the conversation we had with Sirkovitz about the 2+1/+1 counters one. For some reason, I seem to have forgotten all of the Strixhaven cards now names, but anyway, and how interesting it was that performed so well simply because people only got it when it was relevant and cast it when it was relevant. Where every other card is kind of put into a box, right? It's like you draw it and it's either good or it's not, or you have to cast it or you don't, or you can cast it or you can't. And that really limits, I think, a lot of the design space where when you do it this way, one card can become a secondary effect that can range a lot depending on what's happening in the game. The thing that worries me is if they pushed it. We see this with Mascot Exhibition. I mean, that's the best rare we've had in years and years, because of what we described earlier. So it's not just power level, right? It's if you push. And interestingly, Mascot Exhibition as just a straight up Magic card isn't even nearly one of the best rares we've had in the last year. It's not even on the radar, right, of making the creatures, and that's like the big thing that it does. It's because you can get it into your hand effectively every game when you want to that does that. And that's the thing that I'd be a little worried about. I'd want more cards like Environmental Sciences and fewer cards, of any higher power level, because that gets unfun really quick. I think for both players, honestly, it's just like, yeah, I'm going to go get my Mascot Exhibition. Like, I'm doing the same thing every game. There's a lot of repetitiveness, and that's a big cost, for Magic. One of the best things about Limited that nobody ever talks about, because it's just the way it is that it's almost effectively singleton, or maybe you occasionally have a couple of a card. One of the reasons why formats like Commander are so popular is because they're singleton and they have a big library, so that you almost never see the same stuff happen over and over again unless you build your deck that way. And here, Limited has that same appeal, but if you start to go too hard on the lesson learned, you can muddy the waters. That said, they stuck the landing. They nailed it. They didn't overdo it. They gave us one big mythic bomb. That's fine. And the rest were all within reason and played out really well. So I'm with you, Luis. Big win on lesson and learn, and I'd like to see it in the future. Speaking of learning lessons, what did this format teach us? What made us better at Limited? What are the takeaways? I talked about the lesson learned just now. You can go really low with the learn card and even low on the lesson card and still have it be worth it. So I think that that's really cool. Also, I really liked that they did push the boundaries. Lesson and learn was a brand new thing. They tried new stuff with lore hold that we talked about, and that created the most movement that I've seen recently in the first, say, 2 weeks of the format, where people were like, whoa, we need to readjust everything and change everything around. A lot of assumptions that you could make if you just read the card file weren't true and didn't play out that way. I had that experience with Woody when he was getting ready to play in the Arena Open. And so he was opening sealed pools and sending them to me and being like, hey, what do you think about this? And, he was running Quintorius and all of these cards like that I was like, Woody, that's not where you want to be. And he just hadn't played the format yet. So he's like, I don't get it. Like, this card looks great. Like, what's the downside? Like, why am I not playing it? And it was like, I had to really think about that, because I was a month in or whatever it was. And so I kind of already had my orders all changed back around. I like that. I like that they pushed the boundaries and we had to make those adjustments early. What did you learn, Luis? Were there any big takeaways for you from the format?
I think the biggest one is that the range of castable spells can be bigger than what you might think. And there wasn't anything too extraordinary going on, but you just got to jam 7, 8 drops in this format at a higher rate than normal. But what was funny about it was the format also was pretty fast in terms of you needed to be doing something early in order to get to that point. So I actually thought that one of the things that the kind of intangibles that this format did a pretty good job of was demonstrating the games don't have to end quickly for the format to be kind of fast, where the games don't end quickly, but if you get behind, they're not going to let up. So you did need a lot of cards. And this is why I like cards like Lash of Malice, because you did need a lot of cards to make sure you didn't get too far behind early. Yet cards that cost 8 mana were still great to put in your deck. So a really cool balance of kind of speed and kind of the top end there, which led to, I think, just a very enjoyable format.
Yeah, a lot of play. It never felt like you ran out of stuff. What grade would you give the format overall? I'd say B+.
I would give it an A-. I think Strixhaven was really good.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite formats. The only reason I don't give it in the A range is because they did miss with a couple of the colleges, and even though that didn't affect my enjoyment, I kind of want to speak in more broad terms about how I think this set was, rather than just if I liked it particularly. For me, I would probably just give it an A. Like, I loved it. I played it and played it and played it and played it, but it also just hit the notes that I really like to do in Limited, and especially if I can just draft that type of deck. I mean, it felt kind of like Cube. It's like I'm just going to do the thing I want to do every time. But I would give it a B+. I mean, I think that they really nailed some stuff, and it's just another winner. I mean, the formula is solid. Whatever they're doing at Wizards with their limited sets is working. We just haven't had like a really crappy limited set in a long time. I think Ixalan's the last one that people were really kind of down on. It was a long time ago now. Okay, big question. What was your favorite card in the format?
I think it was Magma Opus. Magma Opus is just such a cool card.
It's funny. You were just talking about casting 8-drops. Mine is Bookie Monster, the Bookworm. So
Bookworm's sweet.
I guess you know what you're getting on the podcast, right? We both pick 8-drops.
For me, too, the fact that Magma Opus has seen a decent amount of historic play means I've cast the card a lot, and I have a lot of positive associations with it. Yeah,
for sure. It's also a thing you can do in that chromatic cube we were just talking about, too, by the way.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's call it a show there. Goodbye, Strixhaven. We'll miss you. Legitimately. Really good format. Yeah. I kind of feel bad for the Dungeons and Dragons set because it's going to have a hard time living up to Strixhaven, I think. And I'm really curious to see if they do revisit the Strixhaven College down the line and give us the other color pairs. I would assume that that's on the list of things to do. It would be very strange if they didn't. And I'm curious to see where that goes too. Do we get lesson and learn again? Is it a whole different take? And we'll have to wait until, I don't know, whenever that comes out, if it does. Okay. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. Make sure you check out our Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources if you enjoy the show and want to support us. Also, our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you go there for all of your pre-order needs. If you want to get your hands on Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, you can head over to Channel Fireball and get your pre-order going. If you do end up getting anything over there, use the affiliate code LR. We do appreciate it. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next time.
So speaking of the D&D set, I hope you got your D20s ready. There's a lot of dice rolling cards in the set.
I've been seeing a lot of people tweeting about this. What's going on with that?
So there's a couple things going on. One is there's a bunch of cards that involve rolling dice. So there'll be cards where, like, if you roll a d20, a 20-sided die, if you roll 1 through 9, something happens. If you roll, here, let me give you an example.
Okay.
Here's Earth Cult Elemental. It just got spoiled. It's 6 mana, 6/6. And it has the ability Siege Monster, which, by the way, they put this like italic ability description word on a lot of cards, which are not, it's not game text, it's just flavor, but I actually love it. So it's a Siege Monster. So it says, when it enters the battlefield, roll it to d20. 1 through 9, each player sacrifices a permanent. 10 through 19, each opponent sacrifices a permanent. And 20, each opponent sacrifices 2 permanents.
Oh, what do they call that?
Critical hit.
Critical hit, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually a card, Critical Hit, which gives a creature double strike, and then if you roll a 20, you get the card back.
Oh, that's sweet.
Which is basically what a critical hit is. It's double damage. But I wanted to talk about the dice rolling cards just for a second because there's a lot going on. First of all, there's some, from what I can tell, pretty asinine spin down versus not spin down die argument / discussion. I'm not going to get into that. I don't care. Second, there's a couple of things going on here. One is that I don't like how many of these cards are 1 through 9, 10 through 19, 20, because it's very close to just flipping a coin. Like you can't do 1 through 10, 11 through 20 because that's just a coin flip. But they wanted to do a die roll, so that part's a little weird. But outside of that, I don't think adding die rolls to Magic is a bad thing. Magic is already such a high variance game. The order of which you draw your cards is just the biggest part of the variance, / the order of which they draw their cards. The fact that you're rolling a die, it does put it a little in your face, right?
It's pretty on the nose.
Because when you draw a land and then you draw on turn 3, you draw your 3-drop or your 2-drop on turn 3, and you just think like, wow, this game would have been so easy if I had this on turn 2,
Yeah.
Like that was you losing the die roll. And,
right.
And when you draw your 2-drop on turn 2, it's like you won the die roll. But if we're being honest, rolling the actual physical dice does feel a little different. So I think we're going to get used to it. There's enough die roll cards in this set that we're just going to get, going to have it happen. But it is a little in your face. It's going to take an adjustment. Just try to think of it this way. Magic's all about variance. A lot of variance going on. It just so happens in this one you see it play out right in front of your face. So I don't know. It's going to be wild. But I guess I hope to polish off that D20 and roll some crits, you know?